House Republicans on Saturday rolled out a continuing resolution, a CR, to fund the federal government operations through the end of September. So this will be a long-term temporary funding measure. Now, Democrat leaders have already signaled that they will not support the temporary funding measure, which was quickly endorsed by President Trump as a, quote, very good funding bill that all Republicans should vote yes on. Of course, the president coming out in support of it should give it a good boost. But with the March 14th deadline fast approaching, will Democrats risk a partial government shutdown and undermine their own messaging in the process? Joining me now to discuss this, Congresswoman Stephanie Bice, a member of the House Appropriations Committee and the Committee on House Administration. She represents the 5th Congressional District of Oklahoma. Congresswoman Bice, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thrilled to be on.
So this temporary long-term funding measure gets us through to next year, in which time, according to the Speaker and conversations I've had with him, this is something he's publicly expressed. I want to get back to the normal appropriations, where the appropriations committees will actually do appropriations bills, the 13 bills, and they'll move those through the process. But this buys the time to do that, does it not?
It does. And I think the key here is that we're avoiding a government shutdown, because really all a government shutdown is a distraction from getting our important work done, which President Trump has said is securing our southern border, protecting our national security interests, and reining in spending. And although we don't have the opportunity to make some of the cuts that we would like to in a full appropriations package, this holds spending flat and gives some flexibility to agencies to be able to move money around. And that's really important, particularly when you're talking about the Department of Defense. When you do a continuing resolution or a CR, what you're doing is you're extending the same funding from the previous year, and those amounts stay the same. And so we have flat funding, but there's no ability to have what we call new starts or start new projects. And so this CR is a clean CR, but it also gives some flexibility to agencies to be able to move those dollars around and focus on the important things that we have in front of us.
Well, given how the government grows every year, no matter what we do, there's always this expansion of it. By continuing this, and if I am reading correctly through this 99-page bill, there's actually some reductions in this. So this is not growing government through this CR. It's actually reducing it by somewhere about $7 billion overall.
That's correct. What we're doing is we're not funding the community project funds that we funded in 24. So you remove those dollars, and it actually is a small savings overall, which is really what we're after. We haven't had a significant reduction in spending in this country in quite some time. And we are now $36 trillion in debt. We're racking up about $1.75 trillion per year. Currently, and this is an unsustainable path. And the president has been very clear that we've got to figure out, how do we rein in bureaucracy? How do we rein in wasteful spending that we have seen really highlighted, particularly in the joint address to Congress last week? These are priorities for the president. And so although we're not able to, tackle the specific programs now, we are seeing that reduction, and we will continue to work on through the appropriations process, writing some of these bills in a way that reduce funding, but also reduce those programs or eliminate those programs that we feel are incredibly wasteful taxpayer dollars.
So Stephanie, help walk our viewers and listeners through the varied vehicles that are out there that we've been talking about. So we're talking about budget reconciliation. That's another topic that's been out there. Now, we're talking right here because March 14th, the end of this week, government funding ceases. So this is a funding measure for the remainder of this fiscal year, go through September of next year. But there's also a discussion where the savings are going to be made and where there's program changes is going to be in the budget reconciliation. Talk about how that all fits together.
Sure. So you're exactly right. Right now, we're addressing sort of the current crisis at hand, if you will, and that's making sure that we do not shut government down. Republicans are very clear. A shutdown is catastrophic for a variety of reasons, and it's a distraction from the president's agenda. We want to make sure that Democrats recognize that we can't shut government down because they don't like some of the sort of policies that are being put forward. So we're going to address the current issue at hand, which is funding government through this September. As an appropriator, we will immediately go into the FY26 appropriations process, which will begin on October the 1st of this year. And then in the meantime, we are going to be doing what we call budget reconciliation. And really, budget reconciliation is just a way for us to put together a package. It has to have an impact on spending that only requires a simple majority in the Senate. So a simple majority in the House and the Senate, essentially bypassing the filibuster in the Senate. And what President Trump has indicated he wants to focus on is certainly extending the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that was passed in 2017, which will help every middle-class family in America. It also helps our small businesses. There are a ton of provisions in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act that will ensure that small businesses continue to thrive. So our focus is going to be on getting that particular bill across the finish line. It's a big bill. We're talking about $4.5 trillion in tax cuts. And my colleagues and I want to see offsets to that. We want to see, the rein in of spending, which I mentioned. So we're going to be using this vehicle to what we call codify some of the cuts that DOGE has found, Elon Musk and his group have found some of the wasteful spending and identified it. And what we plan to do is use those cuts, those offsets, as part of the reconciliation package so we can pay for essentially the tax cuts that we want to continue, likely making permanent those important provisions that are helping families across the country.
So if I were to describe this as a race that we're running, what we're looking at here with the CR, the low hurdles, we get to the budget reconciliation, the high hurdles, and then, of course, we have the appropriations process, which hasn't been done really in about 20 years. So that's going to be quite significant if Congress is able to move through the normal appropriations process. All right, Stephanie, let me ask you a couple of questions about this CR, because generally Republicans are opposed to it. A lot of Republicans, not all, but the last several CRs, we've seen quite a few Republicans opposed to it. It's required Democratic support. So, A, are all the Republicans on board, because you don't have much to spare? And B, do you have any Democratic support?
Well, let me first start by saying I've only seen one of our Republican members come out publicly in opposition to the CR, and that's Thomas Massie. He's been pretty clear for quite some time now that he does not favor this because he believes it is just continuing to kick the can down the road. And to some extent, I understand his frustration. But I do think that for a lot of my colleagues, we recognize that this is really a cap on spending or even a slight reduction. And so being able to vote for this is not the same as the CRs of the past, where you're continuing spending in a way that really, in many minds, doesn't make sense. So I do think that you're going to have my colleagues support the CR. You also have the president coming out, as you started this particular segment with Caroline Leavitt, the press secretary to the president, saying that, we need to pass this. The president is fully behind us. He is publicly supporting it, actively calling members that may be, wavering on whether or not to support it, and convincing them that this is the right strategy to move forward. On the Democrat side, I think it remains to be seen. You have seen several members of the Democratic Party come out and suggest that they are not going to support the CR, which is really confusing to me because they supported it last year. Many of them supported it in September of last year and in December of last year. So to suggest that they're not supporting it now when we're not sort of making any cuts, it's a clean CR. We're giving some flexibility to DOD, which is actually something that they've asked for, doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I think at the end, if we don't get Democrats to support a clean CR, what are they going to support? I think that just indicates that they would prefer a government shutdown. They would prefer chaos. And that is certainly something that Republicans are not interested in seeing in the future.
I mean, there's certainly a lift in the House because you only have one vote to spare. But in the Senate, they're going to have Democratic support to get this across the line.
And you've already heard senators like Senator Fetterman say that he doesn't understand why you wouldn't be supporting a CR, why you would want to shut government down. So I do think that you're going to have some moderate Democrats that will get on board in the Senate and will not let this government cease to operate.
Congresswoman Bice, I want to thank you for joining us today. Thanks for your insight on the process as it is unfolding this week.
Thank you for having me.